today I wanted to start by talking about a team that I don't think they ever talk about on the mainstream media, but it's a team that I know that you are uniquely qualified to speak on because you probably watch more of this team than anyone else I know. And that is the first team eliminated from playoff contention this season, and it's the Utah Jazz.
Yes,
Because the Utah Jazz are in a terrible form. We're just going to be honest about it. They're 15 and 50. They've lost their last six.
yes,
However, in and amongst all of the losing, there are some very promising signs. I don't know if you saw the stat that I sent you last night, that their 29th pick from the draft, Isaiah Collier, is now only 69 assists away from breaking John Stockton's record of most assists in a single season by a rookie for the Utah Jazz. There are 18 assists, 18 games left, and Collier needs to average just under 4 assists per game to break that record. And the way that he's been playing, he's absolutely going to break that record. So, that's a pretty impressive record to break given the stature that John Stockton holds at the point guard position and the amount of assists he put up throughout his career. And the other player that I wanted to talk about was Kyle Filipowski, a second round pick for the Utah Jazz, who over the month of March so far is averaging 20 points a game to go along with 9 rebounds. And, BJ, I know you keep a very close eye on the Jazz games. And these are two of their draft picks. They, in fact, had a lottery pick who, I've not seen too much of. This is their late first round pick and their second round pick. And Danny Ainge has managed to strike gold once again. So let's talk a little bit about the Utah Jazz here.
yes, we should. And it's been a tough go around for them this year. No doubt about it. You know what they won, 14, 15 games. Is that what they
15 and
won?
50.
15 games. However, there is some bright lights in there. And one of them happens to be Isaiah Collier. Now, we've seen Danny figure this out for your Boston Celtics. I mean, he drafted Jayson Tatum, he drafted Jaylen Brown.
When he drafted Jayson Tatum, you know, um, the Celtics had the number one pick in the draft that year. And they traded back to the third spot in order to gain a future first round pick as well, which was a big risk move. But Danny Ainge was so sure that Jason Tatum was the player he wanted that he could trust Philadelphia to take Markel Fultz and the Lakers to take Lonzo Ball. And also when he drafted Jaylen Brown, I remember the fans being very unhappy. So I think people wanted him to take Chris Dunn instead of Jaylen Brown. And both picks were at the time perceived as high risk plays. And both of them have worked out pretty well. So Danny seems to know a thing or two about the NBA draft.
Well, yes, you're gonna, you won't, and you hear me say this more when you do the draft. You're gonna get some of them right, but you haven't been through the draft until you've missed. And right now, everyone, you think a player is going to do well, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out, for whatever the reason may be. In this particular case, with Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, he got it right. And he got it right in a very big way. But what Danny has really done to me is he's always got that coaching situation right.
Mm, mm.
Now, to when you start looking at these, draft and what have you, I mean, think about some of his hires. Doc Rivers. He got what's the
Brad
president of there?
Stevens,
Brad Stevens. Now this kid Will
Hardy
Will
is the
Hardy.
assistant to Ime Udoka.
Yes. Then guess who he hired? Guess who he also interviewed before Will Hardy?
Joe Mazzulla.
Joe Mazzulla. Okay. Now Danny has got that right. Now that's to me. Now that's not an accident. Now he is the whole coaching and building of a culture. He gets right. Now I happen to have followed and are still following the Utah Jazz because of Isaiah Collier. Danny got that right. he, he
Hmm.
he got that right. But he also got that right in that draft. The players that he's drafted. He's got his staff right. And when you look at the foundation and the pillars he's put in place there, He's got everything in place. And more importantly, he is positioned to make a move in free agency if he desires, in the draft if he desires. His players are going to improve from within because they have young players and they've committed to this. He can go in any direction at any given moment and figure out wherever that good player, right? He's going to draft well. He's going to go through free agency. He can do it through a trade because he has accumulated enough pieces to move around, and he has players who fit what he's looking to do, which is they're always in the gym, meaning that they have a work ethic, so forth and so on. So Danny has positioned this beautifully. And that's a skill. This is not an accident now. And we have to give Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, and the Utah Jazz credit. And going back to Isaiah Collier, I mean, he has been, it's not like he came in, from the first day and showed this. When you watch them play, he's getting better. And the kid, Filipowski, as well, is getting better and better and better as they go along this process. So pretty soon, Mo, we're going to be talking about the Utah Jazz, just like we're talking about the Boston Celtics, because he's going to continue to build, and he can go and he can play in any. During the draft, you hear Danny Ainge. During trade deadline, you hear the Utah Jazz. Free agency, they can do that as well. So I have to give them a lot of credit. I respect what they've done.
I don't know many free agents queuing up to sign for the Utah Jazz, though.
Free agency, as we traditionally know it, that is correct. But here's what Danny is really, really excellent at. His free agency, this is my opinion now. His free agency is the following. He can identify a player that's already under contract, and that becomes his free agent signing. Just like with John Collins, for instance.
So a trade.
Yes, a trade or what have you. He is creative enough to say, well, okay, maybe you can't get a free agent like a Lakers franchise, for instance, or a Boston Celtics franchise because
the Celtics never got free agents. Yeah. And the biggest free agents they ever got were Al Horford and Gordon Hayward.
Maybe they are not positioned. You could argue that maybe they are not positioned to get a Kevin Durant or somebody like that if they were to go. However, but because of their management of the cap, they can acquire any player. They're flexible enough to acquire any player at any given time as they become available. So a lot of teams now are taking this, and this is something that we should point out here. A lot of teams now are looking at the trade deadline as free agency. How do you acquire a player who's already under contract? And it may not be a contract that works for the previous team, but it works for you, provided you have the flexibility to navigate that. So teams are taking that approach now. You're seeing that more often than you're seeing the traditional free agency that you would normally see where guys would sign big contracts or make big moves, big headlines in July when we normally see it. So, you have to give these guys credit when you see it. So the Utah Jazz, Isaiah Collier in particular, you see what they're doing, and he has been a bright spot for this organization and what he's able to do. And I would venture to say he will probably be an all rookie selection, which is incredible, knowing, the path and seeing it, where he was drafted. And if you were to redo this draft, Mo, so, if you were to redo this draft, I think it's pretty safe to say, he would probably go a lot sooner in the draft.
We talk a lot about on this show, you talk a lot about executives and coaches and teachers of the game not quite being what they once were. What's the difference between Danny Ainge and a lot of the other executives out there in the league, that he has this ability to time after time identify talent that perhaps other people don't see in the same way? Because Danny, you've known him for a long time.
Yeah.
What's his special ability to be able to find these guys?
Well, I would venture to say, Mo, you ever hear people say, I don't know what it is about such and such and such and such, but I just know it when I see it.
Yeah.
Every time I'm with Danny, I just know when I see another person who understands winning. Just very simple. Danny has been, think about the people Danny Ainge has worked around. First of all, he was with Red Auerbach. Think
Hmm.
about this. Danny went to BYU. He won. He comes in the league. He's playing with Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Larry Bird, and Dennis Johnson. Think about that.
Hmm.
He's playing alongside four Hall of Famers and arguably one of the greatest executives of all time.
Do you know the craziest part that people don't realize? He actually played baseball for 3 years before deciding that he
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
play in the
yeah.
NBA.
Well, I'm old enough to know that, to have seen that, right? He played with Cedric Maxwell. Danny has to know, and you have to have learned something along this path. And that's what he knows. He knows one thing, winning. Once you win, it affects you. Just like losing has an effect, winning also has an effect. Danny understands winning basketball players. There are good basketball players, and then there are winning basketball players. For instance, Al Horford is a winning basketball player.
Hmm.
You just know it when you see it. Kevon Looney, for instance, he's a winning basketball player. Okay, there are players that you know it when you see it. They may not be appreciated because they can get stats and do all those things, but there are players who are winning basketball players, and those things don't show up in the stats. That's what Danny understands. I mean, this is not an accident. And he knows that and he understands that. And once you are around that, you can't help but to respect that. And that's he's obsessed with winning. So you say, well, look what they're doing now. No, he knows what he has to do and he's not afraid to do it.
And speaking of that kind of winning, as a player, not only did he play on those Celtics teams that won championships with some of the greatest players of all time, he then got traded to the Kings, but then he made his way to the Portland Trailblazers, took them to the NBA Finals. Then
Think about
he
it.
went to the Phoenix Suns, took them to the NBA Finals. Unfortunately, both times he ended up against a certain Bulls team featuring a certain Mr. Armstrong. But maybe more people would realize this if you guys weren't there ruining his NBA Finals every time.
No, you just know it when you see it. I remember competing against him. He was a phenomenal competitor, very competitive. I mean, he had a competitive spirit about him. Danny poke his nose in there. Every time I see him, I always joke. I was like, who haven't you had a fight with in the NBA? He would always get in some type of skirmish. He's friends with players, but he'll fight you. He'll fight you right now. I mean, he's just
When he was a
that's what he
coach, he had
is.
a fight with Rob Ory.
That's just that's just his personality. But you have to respect it, and I think in the next year or two, you're going to start seeing things trend for them. That's going to show up in the in the win column for this organization. And I talk about roster construction. Danny's right up there with the best of them, if not the best in the league. He just gets it. You just know it. He has a confidence about himself. It's not a quiet confidence, but he has a confidence about himself. He talks a lot of trash. He's the best trash talker and executive in the NBA for sure. And you got to respect it. As they say, he doesn't miss. The guy just doesn't miss. He doesn't miss. And every year, It's like playing chess with him in the draft. And I give him and I give them credit for what they do, how they go about their business. And I've always had much respect for him wherever he's been in the NBA. But now that he has all these draft picks, I get to talk to him more. And I learn a lot in just my conversations with him because he shoots you straight. And that probably goes back for our relationship, but he's got it figured out. And every year he puts on a masterclass during the draft. He really does. He's figured it out. He's figured out a thing or two about this business, and I would imagine it makes him very proud every time he looks at the Celtics
Yeah.
because I mean, think about that. I mean, he's not there, but everything he's done is there, and he
Yeah.
did it. I mean,
100%.
that's that, and I mean, and he is a Celtic.